So I'd like to say welcome, thank you for coming. Boa noite, buenas noches. It's lovely to see you here, and we are going to talk about Choro music, which we've billed as the original Brazilian music. Now, Choro is probably not the most well-known type of Brazilian music. One of the things we want to explain tonight is that the styles that are more familiar to us, like Samba and Bossa-Nova, they just would never have happened if Choro hadn't emerged in the late 19th century in Rio. So tonight Dave and I are going to talk about how Choro started, where it came from, the different social, cultural and musical influences that brought it together when it particularly emerged in the late 19th century. We're going to play some classic Choro pieces from some of the important composers. And we need some help doing that. So if you'd like to clap along, dance obviously, because dance is very important, sing along, we just really like your help with that. So without further ado, and I think as Dick has said, we're going to talk and play for about 45-50 minutes and then have a break for questions. So I'll just start with a slide here that if the start of Choro can be traced to any point in time, it's this. It's the 22nd of April in the year 1500, when Pedro Álvares Cabral and his expedition of 1,500 men and 13 ships accidentally landed on the eastern coast of South America. They landed there, they met the indigenous peoples there, they exchanged goods, they refueled for the rest of their journey. And Cabral looked around and he said, I quite like this place. In fact, I like it so much I'm going to claim it for the King of Portugal. I guess that's what you did in those days. You just sort of claimed lands. But that was the absolute start of I suppose, the modern Brazilian nation and also Choro music. Now, I said accidentally because South America was not their intention. They kind of went a bit off course. They had two objectives for this expedition. One was to go to Calicut in India to consolidate the spice trade, which was huge then for Portugal and for Europe. And the other objective they had was to, on their way back, to call into West Africa and in order to expand and exploit the emerging slave trade. So this one voyage set the scene for Brazil and for Choro music. It set the scene for the future migrations, the enforced migration of slaves from Africa and the voluntary migration of peoples, particularly from Northern Europe. And we're going to now talk about how those migrations and those cultural influences formed the basis of Choro music. Dave.
So when Brazil then started to, the Brazilians started to take part in the slave trade, that Brazil was one of the places that I think probably had more slaves transported from Africa to Brazil than anywhere else. And of course, when this happened, the Africans that were enslaved, that came over, also brought their culture and their music and their dances with them. And the influence of the African music was a big factor in the evolution of Choro music. So the first thing that we're going to look at, the first rhythm that we're going to look at, and the first dance that we're going to look at is a dance called the lundu. And it's believed that this dance was a courtship dance in Africa. It's a very provocative and suggestive dance that starts off very, very slow. It's a couple dance. And it's the male is trying to woo the female. And during most of the dance, the female doesn't want to have anything to do with him, and she rejects his advances all the time. But gradually, as the dance goes on, the beats gradually begin to get a little bit faster, and they come a little bit closer together. By the end of the dance, they are entwined as it goes very faster, and it gets so this is a very kind of sort of slow dance to start with, and it's in 2/4 time. So most of Choro music is in 2/4, and of course, because we have only got 2 legs, we tend to dance 1, 2, 1, 2. So here you can see a picture of what it might have been like where the slaves were actually getting together and dancing at night time, in the very short times where they had any free time from the work that they had to do. The interesting thing about this dance, though, is that after a while, the white bourgeoisie became interested in it. That white people would sneak out at night time to go and watch the dances. And after a while, they were also invited then to join in with them. And this illustration is an illustration of also some white people there and some people joining in with the dance. So the dance is called the lundu, and it has this rhythm. Now, I know that many of you are probably don't read music, and that's okay, because we're just going to clap. I want you to join in with this to show you the rhythm, because Choro music is a very rhythmic music, and it's about the amalgamation of different rhythms coming together that evolved into Choro music. So I'm going to clap it to you to start with. So this rhythm is ba 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 da 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 ba 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 ba. Join in when you think you've got it. Hey! And stop. Excellent. We were wondering whether this was, if we put the music up, it would put people off, but actually you did really well. Excellent. Okay, so this is the lundu, and we're going to play you a lundu now, and we're going to, just to illustrate what it was like, the lundu is still danced in Brazil. It's not a huge popular dance, but it is still quite popular with tourists. So I actually found it was quite difficult to go and find some of the original music, but I found this piece that we're going to play you now being played by people playing to the tourists and having people dancing the dance for the tourists. So it might not be authentic, but it's nearly authentic.
Thank you, Dave. We've looked at now the lundu, the major African influence on the emergence of Choro music. The other primary influence was from the European migrants, and the other influence is the polka. Now, the polka is a folk dance originally from Bohemia, and is still played in many places, certainly in Central Europe and curiously in Ireland. But it moved from the folk arena into the salons and the dance halls of Central Europe in the 1830s and 1840s and became very fashionable. And after Brazil gained independence in 1822, there was an increased migration of European peoples to Brazil, and they took the polka with them. Now, the polka is a much more, I suppose I should say, upright dance, more formal dance, and has a much a less syncopated, less bouncy beat than the lundu. So let's have a go at clapping this. Again, it's 1, 2, 1, 2. So it goes. Great. Thank you. Thank you. So almost a military type beat. We're going to play a polka now. I'm going to play a piece of recorded music of a polka. And this is a Brazilian polka. It is a piece of music that was composed by a remarkable woman called Chiquinha Gonzaga, who she was of mixed race. She divorced. She was a single mother. She was a wonderful composer and performer, and she became the very first female conductor in the whole of Brazil. Remarkable woman. She composed many classic pieces. This is one called Catita. She was a pianist, and the recording I'm going to play now is our friend Knud playing this piece on piano. I'll play an extract from it. I haven't got a fade out button. I wish I had. Okay, Dave.
So now we have two rhythms, the lundu rhythm and the polka rhythm. And the combination of these two rhythms led to the beginning of the musical style called Choro. And Choro actually means, the Brazilian word choro means to cry. However, it's a bit of a problematic word because choro, actually most choro music is wonderfully happy and delightful. What it really means is that it's full of emotions. So it's both happiness and sadness. So it's a very passionate music from the dances, and also it's because of the passion that the musicians have for the music as well. So it began to spread through house parties. The Chiquinha Gonzaga, who we've just seen, hosted many parties for musicians and composers. And so the Choro music, style of music, was born. And there was a belief also that Choro music was a music to be shared by everyone. So you were invited to come and join in with playing the music, and the groups of people that played the music was known as a roda, and the word roda means circle. So everyone sat in a circle to play, and you learnt to play by using your ear. So you were invited in. If you wanted to play an instrument, then everybody picked up playing by ear. So we now have two rhythms which have evolved from those two which we've just clapped. The first one, which is a regular beat, do I give that a go? Great. And you will find this rhythm in most Choro tunes. Somewhere you will see this rhythm. And then the second rhythm is more of an accompanying rhythm. Chap chap chap, chap chap chap, chap chap chap, chap chap chap, let's chap chap chap, chap chap chap, chap chap. Thank you. Now, that rhythm you will hear very much on the instrument which Phil is playing, which is the pandeiro. Phil, can you just show us the pandeiro for a minute? And just give us a little bit of... So that comes through on there, and also on the cavaquinho, which Mike is playing. So you'll hear that rhythm in the background against the first rhythm, which has the melody in it. So we'd like to play you another piece called Flor Amorosa, and this is believed to be the first Choro ever written. It was written by Joaquim Antonio da Silva Collado Jr. in 1875, and it's thought to be the first Choro. So we're going to give you a taster of this now. Oh, before I do that, I forgot about this one. I thought this would be a good place to introduce the instruments of Choro. And originally, as you heard, the piano was one of the first instruments that was used. I haven't got an illustration of the piano here. It was too big to get on the slide. But other instruments early instruments were the saxophone and the clarinet. Many people that played Choro music originally were bands, and in particular the bands of the fire brigade, strangely. They would meet up and play together. So the flute, the saxophone and the clarinet were early instruments of Choro. Later, stringed instruments were introduced, and I'll talk to you later about one of the main players of the bandolin, which is the Brazilian mandolin. So we have the cavaquinho in the middle, the bandolin by its side, and then the 7-string guitar, which we've got Francisco playing this evening. Okay, so we'll now give you a taster of Flor Amorosa.
dancer, the first written down Choro. We talked about the dances, the lundu dance and the polka dance, and as well as the music, the Choro music, a form of dance evolved to accompany the music, and that dance is known as the Maxixe. I think, as you can see from the drawing here, it's somewhat less formal than the polka. It's a somewhat more intimate dance. This drawing is trying to illustrate the fact, again, the coming together of two cultures, the two societies, really. Maxixe has a more funky rhythm. It has a syncopated rhythm. So I'm going to clap this now, and then please join in with me. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah. Thank you. I think you can hear that's pushing the beat and pulling the beat a bit. Now, Maxixe has an interesting history. It evolved as the dance form in the late 19th century and moved across from South America to Europe and then across to the States. There are times when you can find Maxixes that are called tango brasileiro, so Brazilian tangos. And of course, tango was becoming very popular at the same time, and they tried to use the same name to attach to Maxixes. In 1914, in the USA, the Maxixe was the most popular dance craze, bar none. It just outsold everything else that was happening at the time. And there's a piece of sheet music from Ernesto Nazareth, one of the great composers, the international dance craze, Maxixe tango. That was 1914. By 1915, it was all over. They'd just forgotten about it, so they just moved on. And there is a saying that says the Maxixe, it was launched at the same time as the Titanic and lasted about as long. There is another nice story that apparently one of the survivors on the Titanic, a little girl, she had a pet, a toy of a pig. And apparently if you twisted the tail on the pig played a Maxixe tune. So we would like to play you a Maxixe now. Maxixe called a Buon Figlio a casa torna, which is loosely translated means the return of the prodigal son. And this is Maxixe by a trumpeter called Buon Figlio de Oliveira. So, O Buon Figlio a casa torna. And please, now you know the rhythms, now you know the dance, and you know the words as well, so please sing along.
now like to come to now that Choro has really become established as a musical form. There were a couple of very, very significant players and composers that came to the fore. The first of these people to emerge was a sax player called Pishinguina. He was a flautist and a sax player. And he became known as the father of Choro because he was a prolific composer and composed many, many tunes which are still played today. He also was a band leader, and he took his band all over Brazil. And also that as the music became established and that Choro music became very popular, the government of Brazil at the time decided that they would adopt Choro as being the music of Brazil. It was the only pure form of music that they could call Brazilian. Now, the government at the time was a dictatorship, and they wanted to give themselves a really good face in the eyes of the world. So they wanted to export this music and get people to listen to it and hear it. And so Pishinguina was asked to go to represent Brazil by taking his music to Paris. This was a very controversial thing for them to do because Pishinguina was a black man, and many of the white upper classes in Brazil were not happy with this. However, Pishinguina took his band to Paris and was a huge success. He went down absolute storm. And so word got back to Brazil of his great success. And so the government were really pleased with the success that Choro music had had, and Pishinguina in particular. While he was there, Pishinguina bought his first saxophone, and he also met many jazz musicians there. So when he returned to Brazil, he also brought back with him the influence of the jazz which he'd heard. And this led to two things. First of all, in his own compositions, that he would very often write two lines of music. So there would be one melodic line, and then he would write counterpoint lines that went underneath the main melodies. And this became a real trademark of Pishinguina. And later he then went to the United States, and he met more jazz musicians. And this began to free up Choro a little bit. And people would start to do small little bits of improvisation around the tunes. And I said earlier that the word Choro also means to cry. It can be a sad thing as well as a happy thing. And in some of the indigenous music of Brazil, there were ballads that were sung that were usually love songs or ballads that were about the sadness of people. And these were called modinhas. So the next tune that we're going to play for you is written by Pishinguina. It's a modinha, and it's called Carinhoso. This is a song. We were hoping to have a singer with us tonight, but unfortunately she got a much better paid gig. So we're now going to play you a recording that we made of our previous band of this tune called Carinhoso.
Assim te soubesse como sou tão carinhoso.
probably one of the most famous Brazilian choro pieces ever written. If it's played in Brazil in a concert, the whole audience joins in singing. It's a very, very moving experience. It's a really beautiful tune. So, with the demise of the Maxixe, a new dance form emerged, which I think probably now everybody associates with Brazil, which is the samba. The samba arrived because of the way that Choro had evolved, but with samba we now have more complex rhythms. Also, it can be danced as a single dancer. It can be a couple dance, or it can be a group dance. And as you see in the carnivals in Rio, you often see people just dancing the samba going down the street, either in ones and twos or in whole troops. And so samba began to have an influence also on Choro music. So Choro musicians then embraced the samba and started to include it and use it in Choro music. So it was a kind of a two-way thing. And one of the exponents in Choro music of samba was Jacob de Bandolim. And Jacob de Bandolim was a mandolin player, or in Portuguese call it a bandolim. And like Pixinguinha, he had a prolific output both as a composer and a musician. His compositions have now become, like Pixinguinha's, standards, and again are still played very much today. So this next tune that we're going to play you is Jacob's tribute to the samba. It's called Receita de Samba, or A Recipe for Samba. Which keen to see getting things getting in the way here.
That's right.
Whoop. Okay, I'll leave it there. I'll touch it. Okay, so we're going to play you a recipe for Receita de Samba, A Recipe for Samba.
Technology. Cassetta de Samba. We just want to talk about one more composer, and for our last tune. This is a guy called Waldir Azevedo, and Waldir was a virtuoso cavaquinho player, and he single-handedly took the cavaquinho out of the rhythm section and made it a solo instrument and composed the principal cavaquinho pieces that we know today. Now, in Brazil, we're talking about the 1940s and 1950s, the main medium of communication was the radio. And there were lots and lots of radio stations all over Brazil. And they were in competition with each other. And one of the things that they did was Jacob was playing on one of the national radio stations, and Waldir was playing on another one of the national radio stations, and they set up this intense competition between the two of them, a bit like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles that we might know, and Blur and Oasis, and I guess somebody's doing it now, I don't know, modern music. But this was 1940s, 1950s in Brazil. The TV didn't start in Brazil until 1950. And Waldir was at the forefront of this, of the emerging music. So we'd like to finish with this piece. It's a Choro samba. You can see that the styles are getting merged together. And this is called Carioquinha, which is a tribute to a young girl in Rio. Dave's going to play the solo on this on the cavaquinho. Thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed Choro music and getting to know a little bit about it. I hope you can see how much we love it and enjoy playing it and just sharing it with people. So just really, before taking questions, just wanted to try and think about what we've talked about and what we've tried to cover in terms of the expedition that Cabral made in 1500, accidentally landing in eastern South America and sowing the seeds of future migrations of peoples and the cultures and the musics that flowed into Brazil. From the enforced migration of African slaves and from the voluntary migration of Europeans to become the rich class there. The Africans bringing the Lundu dance, the Europeans bringing their polka, and how those came together in society. For the Choro music and the Maxixe dance, and how that evolved into Samba. And although we've only just come up to the 1950s, I just wanted to say that Choro music is alive and well. There are regular rodders held in Bristol and in London and Lisbon and Paris and Rio and all over the world, and there are some really wonderful young musicians who are embracing the style and taking the music forward. So it's very much alive and well. Thank you very much. That's really what we wanted to cover. So, Dick, how should we... Oh.
Talk among yourselves.
Okay, okay.
It's time for questions. And I should be going around with a microphone. And I'll try not to get feedback. But if you talk straight into it like this, it means that our Zoom listeners have got a chance to hear you. And when you ask the question, Mike or Dave, whoever answers, will repeat the question for our listeners on Zoom, because it's very difficult. Sometimes they just get a muffled noise in the background. So hold the microphone quite close to you like this, please. And the first question is... Good man.
Thank you very much.
You take your mask off. Of course, if you're asking the question, that's fine.
Thank you, that was wonderful. Could I ask, you mentioned about Cabral claiming Brazil for the King of Portugal, and then the influences from Africa, Europe. Are there any influences from Portugal itself in Choro?
Yes.
So for our Zoom listeners, the question was, in terms of the influences on Choro music, are there direct influences from Portuguese music on Choro? Dave, I think you're best placed to answer this.
Yes, there are. It's probably not such a kind of direct influence, though, but the small instrument, the cavaquinho, is a Portuguese instrument. And also there is an instrument called the Portuguese guitar, which is very similar to the mandolin sound. So these instruments would have been taken over, and also the percussion instruments, the pandeiro, is a kind of relative of the percussion instruments that would have been played in Portugal. So it's not such a powerful direct influence, but there is very definitely both from the instrument point of view, and also to a certain extent some of the rhythms. They are also part of that, but I think that the Portuguese at the time, which they influenced or sort of started to colonize Brazil, were more influenced actually by other European kinds of music. So for example, the classical waltz was also a part of. We haven't played you a waltz this evening, but the waltz is also incorporated into into Choro music, and also there are some Choro tunes called Scottish, which are not strictly Scottish, but they come from that kind of sort of Northern European influence. We mentioned the polka, of course, as well, and that Paris was very much the centre during the late 1800s. That the influence of Paris was huge on the music, very much of the sort of European music in the rest of the world. So people from Brazil, but particularly the white upper classes, they looked to Paris for their influences, and they looked at, well, what's going on in Paris? We need to have that over here, kind of sort of right now, which is why the polka became so important, and also the waltz. But yes, there were influences, but they weren't quite so strong as the other influences that were there.
Thank you. I was interested about the 7-string guitar. What the standard guitar is 6 strings. Is it an extra bass string below the E string, or is the actual makeup of the strings different from the standard guitar?
Let me repeat the question a minute for our Zoom listeners. It's a question about the 7-string guitar and just what is that 7th string? Francisco, would you?
So for the Brazilian style, they added an extra bass string, which is the bottom C. The Brazilian didn't invent the 7-string guitar because it was all present in Russia in the 1800s, but they tuned the 7th string to a low B, and somehow the Brazilian just found that doing on C was really comfortable for the bass areas, which is the bass lines they play on the guitar, and adopted this kind of guitar that then spread into the whole of South America. You have 7 strings in the early tango as well in Argentina. I think they tune it different sometimes to A, bottom A. So it's all mix and match depending on each style. It's like the basic configuration of a guitar, and each country chooses where they want to tune that 7th bass string.
Next question, please. Just put your hands up if you've got one for an hour in the future. Right?
Oh.
We've got 2 on that row. Microphone.
I just wanted to know the influence on Bossa-Nova from Choro.
That's a good question. So the question from for Zoom listeners is the influence of Choro on Bossa-Nova. Well, Dave.
Bossa-Nova was actually responsible for the demise of Choro during the 1950s, when Bossa-Nova really sort of took off. And at that time, sort of Choro was moved into the background, so there wasn't really as much influence. So basically, Bossa-Nova didn't really influence Choro music, but Choro music was backgrounded by Bossa-Nova at the time. And during the 1950s, Bossa-Nova became all the rage. Everybody wanted to play Bossa-Nova. I mean, there were composers like Villa-Lobos, for example, who straddled the two, and also there was influences from classical music as well in there. But basically, after the 1940s, when Choro was really big and was probably considered sort of the main music in Brazil, then from the 1950s, then Bossa-Nova took over, and then there were lots of other influences like jazz coming in from the United States. And then also the young people got influenced by pop music from the United States as well. And so we didn't really hear about Choro music again really until about the 1980s, when another group of young people then started to rediscover the music of their parents and their grandparents. It was almost like young people were looking to try and find their roots again and their musical roots. And when that happened and they started to rediscover Choro, then it started to be played again, and young people started to compose new Choro pieces. And there then evolved some astonishingly versatile young players in the new wave of Choro players. That their versatility is just extraordinary. I think that though that the music, the Choro which is being played now, was very certainly influenced by that coming of bossa nova and the influences of jazz then, because I think that the repertoire and the musical resources which young people now draw upon for their Choro contains all of those things. Does that help to answer your question?
Really, I wanted to know the influence of Choro
Microphone, please.
on bossa-nova.
All right.
The other way around.
It's the other way around, really. Yes. Yes.
Hello, I have a question about volume of the instruments and popularity. When people start dancing, if everyone started dancing in this room, we wouldn't be able to hear you. We have to dance very quietly. And how was there, particularly I'm thinking, the early days, First World War, 20s, 30s, amplification was very poor. These are very quiet instruments. Other traditional music developed louder instruments, piano accordions, concertinas and things to keep that dance rhythm going. How did Choro manage to do it? Was it just numbers of players, or how did they do it?
I'm going to avoid answering this question as well. The question for the Zoom audience is about being able to hear the musicians playing when there was a lot of people in the room and dance, and how did people actually hear the musicians playing?
Okay, to answer the first part of this is that, as I mentioned with the music of Piscinguina, that he was playing saxophones and flutes, and the bands were big. They were big bands, and there were lots of saxophones and there were lots of flutes. And like I mentioned, if you go back to the early 1900s, many of the bands that were playing then were almost like military bands in their size. The more Choro evolved, the smaller the bands got. And when Jaco de Mandolin started playing, his groups were very small. They were down to about sort of 5 or 6 people. However, by that time, amplification had started to get much better. And the photographs which I see of Jacob playing is that he's playing in front of a microphone. And his other musicians would also have had microphones then at the time. And much of from the 1940s, 50s, that a lot of this music was actually played on the radio. So people would use the radio and turn the radio on and be able to hear it through the radio shows where Choro was played. And then, of course, if you take it up to today's music, amplification is now much, much more sophisticated. So all the stringed instruments have pickups in them now. So they can be plugged directly into a big PA system or an amplifier so that people can hear. We were playing acoustically tonight for you because we just love playing acoustically without all the amplification. And obviously with a small audience, it's lovely to be able to play acoustically. But even if we were doing a concert, we would plug into a big PA system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I was going to say something about the 7-string guitar. I think the evolution of the 7-string guitar was partially about that volume question, because there was traditionally no bass in Choro music, and so the 7-string evolved. And quite often even now, but in early groups you could find a 7-string and a 6-string guitar to actually give that volume.
Now, next question is through the Zoom chat.
Excellent.
And I'm going to pass the microphone over to our Zoom controller, Jim Greaves, who incidentally has set up all these microphones that you see around. Very sophisticated operation. Jim.
Hello. I have the wonderful thing about Zoom is that people can zoom in from all over the world. A very good friend of mine from Brazil is listening tonight, all the way from Western Village. She asks not so much a question, more of a request. Could you play Tico Tico no Fuga? Apologies for my Portuguese pronunciation. That's Tico Tico no Fuga.
You know, it's almost as if we'd set this up, isn't it? Because we had intended to play Tico Tico as the last number. So we would love to play that for you. Tico Tico is probably the most well-known Choro piece, and many people don't realise it's a Choro piece. It was written as a Choro by Zaquino de Abreu. And then words were set to it later on, and it became incredibly popular through the movies and such like. So yes, we would love to play that. Are there any more questions before we play out? Yes.
I can't remember the name of the instrument. You want to? One of the instruments, I can't remember the name of it, but it's very similar to the ukulele. Is it similar or is it tuned differently?
So the question for Zoom is the small instrument that looks like a ukulele. How closely related to a ukulele is it? It's closely related. It's the same size. It's tuned differently, and it has steel strings rather than nylon strings, which traditional Hawaiian ukulele has. But it's in the same size, the same sort of bracket. So the cavaquinho, the story I have about the cavaquinho is it started in Cape Verde Islands, and then moved from there up to Portugal when they became Portuguese, and then came across with the Portuguese to Brazil. So, but it's the same sort of instrument, but steel strings rather than nylon strings. Yeah. And therefore much louder. Thank you.
Any last questions?
I was intrigued that Choro means cry, because just looking at you guys playing, it looks like it's impossible to play without smiling. And for the audience, indeed, we're all smiling behind our masks.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. The question was, how can the word Choro mean cry when it's clearly so infectious and joyous? It's a dilemma, yes. I mean, I spoke to Dave about this. I said, to me, it's like the use of the word blues, which is, describes many emotions, doesn't it? And I think Choro does as well. So, but yeah, we can't stop smiling. So thank you very much. We'd love to play Tico Tico for you, and please join in.
Mike Pryor, Mr. Dave Griffiths, Mr. Phil Bunce, and Mr. Francisco Correa. Ladies and gentlemen, awesome. Mike and I would like to give our thanks to those people who've given so much time behind the scenes. Betty Suchar, sometime chair of Bath Royal's directors, for her invaluable work meeting and greeting, and of course Kate at the back. Didn't she do a good job in letting everyone in and keeping everyone safe? Thank you. Yes, please. And not least Tim Greaves at the back, our technical supremo. 3 hours he put in before this event, ladies and gentlemen, just to make sure that the band were done justice through not only live but also on Zoom. He was even late for his beer and sandwiches in the green room. And thank you most of all, our audience, both live and on Zoom, without whom there would be no event. Thank you very much. Good night and a safe journey home. Good night, everyone. Why don't you play us out, please? Why don't you play us out with that last number? You don't have to play the whole of it.
Should we do Noches? Can we play a different?
Play anything you like. Do we want us to be played out? Indeed we do. Anything you want.
Yeah, true. Okay. Noches karaoke. We'll dance out.
We'll dance.
The clock is an hour past.